So, dear colleagues, we continue our working day, and I'm giving floor to the Principal Deputy Chief Monitor of OSCE SMM, Mr. Alexander Haug.
Good afternoon, dear friends. We had many false starts, dashed hopes and broken promises over the past 2.5 years. For the long-suffering people of Donbass, skepticism is therefore not an unnatural reaction. Many initiatives have been taken, and yet the violence has continued. Despite this, I welcome what happened in Minsk on Wednesday. There, a framework agreement on disengagement of forces and hardware from 3 areas, namely Petrivske, Zolote, and Stanitsia Luhanska, was signed. The sides have already recognized the fundamental need to separate armed forces and formations. They already understood that proximity fueled and made it difficult to prevent cross-contact line violent engagement. They understood that there needed to be sufficient distance between the sides on the ground so as to prevent the first shot that generally triggered wider violence. And they have for some time now understood that there must be disengagement. Dear friends, let me be very clear on one thing. Wednesday's agreement was signed by the sides, not the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Like with all previous agreements, the sides are responsible for implementation. Only the sides can withdraw weapons. Only the sides can demine. Only the sides can ensure freedom of movement for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. And ultimately, only the sides can disengage. Implementation of this agreement is the responsibility of the sides. The role of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission is clear. The OSCE SMM will monitor the process of disengagement and will verify compliance. While one side may not like the SMM watching their every move, they can be assured that we are doing the same on the opposite side of the contact line. Each side therefore knows what the other is doing. There is no room for confusion, misunderstanding, paranoia, or unfounded fears. Such regime ultimately instills confidence and trust, and in turn leads to greater compliance. Dear friends, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission is an unarmed civilian monitoring mission. Our monitors can only verify implementation of this agreement if the sides allow them to do that. Without verification, this agreement will not work. On the very day this framework agreement was signed, SMM patrols were prevented from moving freely in Petrivske and Zolote, 2 of the 3 disengagement areas. This is what they faced in Zolote. These concrete blocks that you see there in front of this disengagement area must be removed immediately. And just beyond this obstacle, the road is heavily mined. These mines and all others on and alongside access roads in and around these free areas must be removed immediately. Armed forces and formations on the ground close to these areas must be notified immediately that there should be no restrictions on the movement of SMM patrols. Only then we can verify that the sites have actually pulled back weapons and personnel from these areas. With access, we can monitor. Through monitoring, we can verify. With verification, there is trust, and with trust, there is complete compliance and full disengagement. Dear friends, what happened last week on the ground in Donbass underlines the urgent need for the sides to implement this agreement. As you can see here, violence levels are still lower than they had been prior to the 1st September recommitment to the ceasefire. This chart, however, also demonstrates the wildly fluctuating levels of violence on a daily basis. Last week, for instance, saw an increase in violence on the previous week, mainly because Horlivka and the Svetlodarsk-Debaltsevo road re-emerged as violent hotspots. For the previous 2 weeks, these areas had been calm. And within the main hotspots, the Yassinovata, Avdiivka, Donetsk airport triangle, the daily fluctuations have been particularly pronounced. On Saturday, for instance, our monitors in so-called DPR-controlled Yassinovata heard at least 150 explosions, as well as numerous heavy machine gun bursts and over 100 small arms shots. Between 12:55 and 13:35, the violence reached a crescendo. An exchange of continuous overlapping fire and explosions was so intense that our monitors were unable to count the ceasefire violations. And yet on Tuesday in Yassinovata, between 10:07 and 15:32 in the afternoon, our monitors heard just one explosion. This volatility proves two things in my mind. First, the sides can stop fighting. Command and control mechanisms on both sides are sufficiently strong to ensure the necessary discipline. And secondly, the resumption of violence is liable at any moment. Dear friends, there are many factors at play, some of which perhaps you and I will never be aware of. But I know one thing for sure. Where the sides have repositioned themselves closer to one another, there was invariably been escalation. We saw it in the Pavlopil-Oktyabr-Pikuzi triangle, in the Zaitsevo area, north of Horlivka, and in the Yassinovata-Avdiivka area, and in the Berezove-Olenivka-Dokuchayevsk area and around Stanica-Luhanska bridge. Dear friends, what happened on Wednesday in Minsk, I hope, is just the start of a wider process. If the sides faithfully implement this agreement, then this engagement can be extended to other areas, in particular to all the hotspots I have just mentioned. There are many uncertainties. not least of which is the willingness of the sides to act what they have agreed upon. But one thing is certain. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission stands ready to play its part. We have the resources, the expertise, and the political backing of 57 participating states. We are already on the ground. Our monitors are watching and listening. We will report what we observe. We will verify compliance. We will instill trust, whose absence has allowed this conflict to fester for far too long. All that remains is for the sides to do their part. Give us the access we need to disengage your forces and hardware now. And I repeat, give us the access we need and disengage your forces and hardware now. I hope with immediate implementation, I can stand here next week and report that these 3 areas have been devoid of violence. If the political hindrances stalling the signing of this agreement could be overcome, there is no reason to expect that the physical hindrances on the ground cannot be overcome too. I know it's possible if the sides do what they have agreed to do. Dear friends, as you know, this week the world celebrates the International Peace Day. It is entirely appropriate that this framework agreement on disengagement of forces and hardware was signed on the same day. Its implementation will be a concrete step towards peace. All that remains is now for the sides to implement it. We will be there. As usual, at the end of my statement, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 707 monitors, of whom 583 are deployed in the east. In addition, there are 317 Ukrainian colleagues and 93 other international staff working for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. We have at least one question. It will be in Ukrainian, so please put on the headphone.
Good afternoon. Fifth channel, how do you evaluate the geographically that they have selected those 3 areas? What the situation around those areas? And the second question, what is the chance that you will get access to those pilot areas? Who is impeding your access to those areas?
Thank you. These 3 areas have been selected in negotiation. So all those who have signed this agreement have agreed to these areas. And not just that, they also have defined the geographic parameters of these areas. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission is stopped in at least 2 of these locations on both sides of the contact line. We have been reporting about these impediments throughout the week in our daily reports and also through our messaging in social media. Overall, the vast majority of freedom of movement restrictions of our monitors occur in areas not controlled by the government. But it is the Joint Center for Control and Coordination and those who have signed the agreement that need to allow us access to these areas. If these concrete blocks that you have seen on this picture, if the mines are not removed, our monitors cannot go to these areas. We are ready, we are there every day. Actually, as I speak here now, my colleagues are in Petrivsky, Bogdanivka, Soloty, and Stanica Luhanska. They are there, they're able to do their job. We have not full access. That first needs to be granted, and then we can document and verify compliance.
Do we have some additional questions? We don't have further questions, so at this point the press conference is finished. Thank you for coming and looking forward to seeing you here next week. Шановні колеги, на цьому прес-конференцію завершено. Наступна подія о 13:30.